Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the 2021 Rutgers Online Learning Conference, Day 1. This is Session B. My name is Karen Harris, and I'm an instructional designer with Rutgers Teaching and Learning with Technology. I will be your moderator for this session, but I am also a co-presenter. This presentation is divided into 3 parts. You are welcome to post questions in the live Q&A throughout the session, but for the most part, we will try to answer your questions at the end of each of the parts of this session. So again, I'm seeing attendees are still coming in, so I just wanted to repeat those rules that we're going to have. This presentation is divided into 3 parts. You are welcome to post questions in the Q&A throughout the session, but we will be answering those questions at the end of each part. So we welcome today Dr. Adrienne Simons, an assistant professor on the teaching track in the Department of Rehabilitation and Movement Sciences in the Rutgers School of Health Professions, and Feliz Carras-Ozen, an instructional designer at Rutgers School of Health Professions. They are going to share with you their deep dive into selecting and implementing an ePortfolio tool for reflection and representation.
Portfolium really helped me write down my future goals, organize my thoughts, and know who I am as a person, as a emerging physical therapist within the next 2 months. So it was a really great way to help showcase myself and be confident in my skills. But it was really nice to have Portfolium as a platform because of the digital world, being able to actually put everything on the online, and then adding artifacts and adding pictures to it was actually kind of fun to do, because like in my generation, it was kind of like Facebook or like Twitter or something like that, where you can add like who you are as a person, but in a professional way, and you can present yourself that way. So I think employers nowadays want to see like who you are as a person, not just who you are on paper. And it was a really easy process.
So again, welcome everyone. We have a lot of objectives listed here if you want to take a moment to read them. Today we are going to together discuss how digital presence communicates professional brand. We're going to propose today a plan for incorporating ePortfolios, which can be the centerpiece of an academic course. We're going to have you begin to reconceive online instructional strategies that will better promote reflection and support a growth perspective. We're also going to talk a little bit about how you can facilitate student adoption of ePortfolios and begin to cultivate an ongoing creative ownership that will happen during the course and beyond. And imagine perhaps that there could be curricular and program implications for ePortfolio use. So today's agenda, as we had mentioned, is going to be in 3 parts. We're going to talk about why we envisioned and then implemented a transition to ePortfolios. That'll be part 1. In part 2, we're going to get into the real nuts and bolts of how we transitioned and implemented ePortfolios. And finally, in part 3, we're going to talk about the lessons learned and what we're envisioning for the future. So again, part 1. Would we transition to ePortfolios? So we all know that resumes and cover letters, for that matter, are still necessary, but paper definitely has limitations. It completely lacks any kind of multimedia that we could incorporate in our representation. But beyond that, just consider that administrative burden. I've worked in schools where an office was focused just on that effort to gather the required documents that are needed for academic and professional representation. And of course, there's that possibility of loss of important information. So again, paper is static. It's difficult to update as well. So our idea is to move to an e-portfolio. So instead of having that physical folder, we're going to have an electronic folder. The selection process took a little bit. I'm hoping that Felice and Adrian might mention a little bit about their research. I can tell you that a number of years ago, I did some research, and I discovered that Portfolium was a wonderful tool that kind of reminded me a little bit of LinkedIn. And I began at that point to promote the use of this tool. One of the benefits I can tell you for Portfolium specifically is both within Canvas or outside of Canvas, Portfolium is free to students. It will always be free to the students. And once they create an account, it's a lifetime account that will generate a shareable URL. It's also very user-friendly, quick to figure out how to build and add and create. It's very familiar to those who use social media platforms, so they'll be able to, again, learn how to use this very quickly. There are some challenges, though. We have this free version on the administrative side that unfortunately has a very minimal integration in Canvas, which means that we need to be creative in figuring out ways to use this to instruct our students, because again, it's not so well integrated, so it's not really seamless. Also, the free version has no reporting capabilities. And finally, recognition. There aren't that many people that know about Portfolium within the larger community or certain professional communities that you might work within. So just a very quick view of the Canvas integration. So what we do have is this ability to generate a Portfolium account. So if your students go into Canvas and they go to their account, and then they click a little further down where it says Folio, you can see that on your screen, that'll take them to a page that is really automatically their account. So it gives them that quick ability to land, and when they click on their face, basically that icon up there, it will open up a new tab where they can then be building and creating. And when they're in that tab, you can see what's generated is a URL. So again, that's their unique URL that they can share with the world. Okay.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Wonderful. We couldn't get through an online presentation without saying that. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Karen, for that great introduction. This is Adrienne coming to you from the health profession standpoint. So some of the COVID realities for our graduates in the physical therapy program may be a little counterintuitive. And the realities related to COVID wasn't just about the pivot to an online platform. It was about the post-graduation reality that our students are facing. And that was really the strong push for me to move our students over to this e-portfolio. So just some context. Our professional students are entering this healthcare workforce and are actually competing for fewer full-time positions than pre-COVID. And because of the economic hardships, it may be counterintuitive to what we might think, that in the middle of a global pandemic, our hospitals would be hiring. There are some furloughs that are going on across healthcare. So those furloughs and the need for our new hires to hit the ground running and be as flexible and as adaptable as possible in this change-rich atmosphere really demanded some type of pivot in marketing and branding for our students to be exactly that new hire. So the need to showcase those characteristics of resiliency and versatility in whatever healthcare related or service experiences that our students have performed while in the program with us was absolutely critical. The other challenge in speaking to our community of stakeholders in terms of the employers that hire our graduates was the need to have flexible new hires who were not only change resilient, but were able to move throughout a healthcare system or were able to be flexible with their schedules. So as a teaching professor, I'm saying, how do we market that with our students who are just so focused on their studies, on graduating on time, and on dealing with their own personal challenges related to the pandemic. So one of the other reasons I wanted to include reflection in our e-portfolios was to be able to demonstrate some of those soft skills, some of those affective characteristics that would be very, very difficult to communicate in a paper portfolio without some type of reflective essay. So it had to have that kind of element to make our students be as marketable as possible. Lastly, the widespread remote interviewing, just like this conference that we're presenting virtually now, really has created a need for our graduates to differentiate themselves from other equally qualified graduates in the tri-state area. But now, since the game has changed onto a digital landscape, I wanted to give our graduates an extra edge. So being able to invest in this e-portfolio was a really important and smart step to make our graduates more marketable. Here's an overview of our project timeline. To say it's accelerated is a very, very generous and a kind word. It was an intense process. We began our initial conversations, we being as a faculty member in my program, reaching out to our school's instructional designer, Felice, and then involving Karen in that process as well. So this was a collaborative effort that began in mid-August and then proceeded to continue up until the start of the course in January. So it was a total of 23 meetings. we have gotten to know each other very well and have never met in person. So it's been an absolutely interesting experience, and I could not have been partnered with two more hardworking and pleasurable colleagues. So I have to thank them right out the gate. But being able to kind of identify an e-portfolio tool, there are many platforms that are available. So being able to make that selection for Portfolium in October, and then looking to make that integration into Canvas so that this wasn't a freestanding type of portfolio that really was separate from what students were already engaged with from a learning management system, and then also in terms of their studies. You know, this had to be something that students really associated with something academic, and this wasn't a supplemental activity. So being able to get that integration through Canvas was really a critical step for student buy-in. Our course began in January and then ran a full 5 weeks, intense half-semester course, and ended in mid-February. Our students are now out on their final clinical affiliation and will be graduating in May. So the timing of this type of project was designed for a late-stage intensive doctoral student who was preparing to enter the workforce or enter a final clinical internship, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. Just some snippets from our literature overview on e-portfolios. There's been a lot published. There are several journals to read if you're just starting out into e-portfolios. So we are no experts by any means. We're just sharing what we've learned, and hopefully there's something in our process that can help you along in your endeavors related to e-portfolios. But some of the snippets we wanted to share with the group was that e-portfolios are a digital repository of student work. So some taglines to consider are collecting information or documents, selecting artifacts, what would be the piece of information, the experience, the certificate, the photo, how do you select those artifacts? And then the last step, my favorite step to talk about, is the reflect step. So having students be able to be purposeful about collecting this information, to be strategic about why are they selecting given artifacts to describe certain traits or characteristics, or to highlight certain experiences, and then allowing some type of reflective activity on that artifact is really, really critical. The other purpose related to that reflection step is to promote self-directed growth and development. I'm a big proponent of strength-based leadership, and especially given our graduate program, our adult students, these are post-undergraduates. So being able to employ some of those adult learning strategies is really, really critical to both get the buy-in for reflective time, but also to connect that reflection to professional growth and development, and using strengths and really highlighting and honing in on a strength-based approach is really important in that process, because our students are putting their best foot forward in that e-portfolio. So it's super critical that the students understand what their strengths are in order for them to be able to highlight those in an ePortfolio platform. Some of the literature related to outcomes for ePortfolios, specifically in graduate students, they've demonstrated increased confidence. And that's related to seeing their accomplishments in a portfolio platform. You heard from Michelle earlier in our opening video, and you'll hear again from her several times during this talk about her experience as a representative of the cohort that went through this first wave of rollout for the DPT program. And you can hear from her about the confidence that she's conveying and the investment and ownership of really making the ePortfolio her own. So just on a personal level, to see this with our students in such a short amount of time, the first time through the process of implementing an ePortfolio was really a fascinating and surprising effect. So we're going to pause for questions on this first part. Karen, I'll kick it back to you to take a peek at the chat, see if we have any burning questions that need to be answered out the gate.
I'm looking at the discussion and the Q&A, and so far, no one is engaging with us. So perhaps we're just very clear. I am hoping that you will join in, everyone, if you have any questions. I'm seeing one of them just coming in now, whether there was use of these portfolios for assessment purposes.
Oh, great question. I was hoping that somebody was going to ask that early. That is in our next steps and lessons learned, to explore what types of, how might we assess the portfolio itself. We have a rubric to kind of give away to you as a freebie, free with attendance. But I wonder if your assessment isn't so much how to assess the portfolio as it is the purpose of the portfolio would be assessment. So I'm going to address that second part because I'm guessing that's what you're asking. I could be wrong. So feel free to type to Karen and let us know. But no, we didn't use the ePortfolio for assessment. We used it more of as a scrapbooking and reflection feature to get our students job ready as a synthesis of their experience to be able to put their best foot forward for branding and for representation of their strengths. So we didn't use it for assessment. But it can be used as a competency-based type of collection. Does that answer your question? I hope so.
Yes, I have excellent, thanks. So
wonderful. All right, so that concludes our introductory part one. If you have any,
I did want to mention there was a question that was posted in the discussion forum, but I'm going to say that we will be getting to this very shortly. The question is, do you have a grading rubric?
Oh, not only do we have a grading rubric, but we shared it with you today. Woo! You are welcome. Save you a step. We all need a little help in this remote teaching, so we wanted to share the wealth around. So we hope you enjoy, and we're open to feedback and other questions. Okay, so moving on to part two. Are we ready to roll? Okay. I'm used to seeing my students' faces on Zoom, so
yeah.
Looking over to part two. So this is really the meat of our talk, is really looking at how, as a physical therapists are all about making people move, whether they want to or not, but we really do try to get buy-in. And so asking the how question and really reporting on this, we thought was critically important. The literature is pretty strong on ePortfolios, and it sounds like a great idea, but show me how this actually happens. How do you move from point A to point B? How do we get this person out of bed and walking in their hospital room? How do we get students to be able to actually use this ePortfolio in such a short amount of time? So let's kick it over to Michelle.
So this is kind of cool, just kind of like Facebook, your profile picture and your background. So if someone were to see my portfolio and be like, oh, I really like your background, I think that's one of the coolest parts. So they ask me oh, where was that taken? And I would literally say, oh, that's at the Cooper River. That's where I run every single day, and I love to watch the sunrise. So that I think is really cool, because that's a conversation piece in yourself. What you put in your background could literally just start a conversation, and then you'd be like, oh, these are the artifacts that I was just talking about. So I'll just start with my first one, just talking about running. So here I was able to show, this is a picture of me on Broad Street in Philadelphia after the Broad Street run. And then I was able to add in a good detailed section of how running relates to my professional goals and my desires, whereas I wouldn't be able to do this on my resume. You couldn't pick up my resume and know that how am I going to use my running as a way to professionally grow myself. But I can say that like I'm looking forward to sharing my experiences as a future PT with patients who are interested in long distance running. And it's also one of my coping strategies, which is a really great asset to me because it shows that I know I can get stressed, but I do have an outlet that I can go to, and that's running. And that's super healthy outlet. So as an employer, from an employer standpoint, looking at this, they would say, okay, like they didn't just do everything in school and okay, well, are they burnt out now? Like, no, it's okay because like she has something that she can go to cope to. And I think also like another cool little thing about Portfolium is like the tags. So I can put like hashtag running biomechanics, and then maybe those viewers can see it. And then also pretty cool, one of my classmates liked it. So that's like a fun part. And then just talking about my LSVT Big certification, which is a certification that I got this past summer, which I was really excited about. Kind of sets me apart from like other candidates that are applying for jobs, but something I'm also really passionate about. So I could show that, yes, I got my LSVT Big certification, which you would see on my resume, but I couldn't give that detail on my resume because it'd be too wordy, but I can talk about here about how I used this at my last affiliation because I was on a acute rehab neurological floor, and I actually used it with my patients and I saw the benefits of it. So that's something that I could write here that I couldn't do on my resume. So I thought that was really nice. And it's also nice and it's in color because it's on the computer. Yeah. So that's that part. And then other pretty cool things. So this is awesome. So I put my applied research poster from one of the conferences that our group went to, but one of the cool features is that I was able to tag my the members that we worked with. And so that also gives them credit. And then I think this one has like the most views, probably because it was linked to other teammates. And that's a good thing because you want to show who you collaborated with. And oh, well, maybe somebody knows my classmate, Anna Johnson. And then let me go to Michelle's page because she knows her. So she's probably, you know, a good person I could talk to. So it's just a great way to make connections about your projects that you made.
Okay, so we heard from Michelle in terms of some of the features of Portfolium. So you got to see it and what it looks like in terms of a finished product. She mentioned some of the features: tagging skills, adding collaborators, being able to liken the number of views, being reported for the different artifacts. So that's a little bit about the overview, almost a tour of Portfolium. So now we'll go into student adoption of the tool on how easy it was for her to use that.
So like, for example, like my one artifact was about like me and my activity. Like I love running. So I just like actually just went on my Instagram and just found one of my favorite pictures of me running and just took a screenshot, sent it to my email, and just went to Portfolium and uploaded. And it was simple as that. There was no like complicated steps. I had to like go find it from like somewhere out in the interweb. Like it was right there. So it was really easy. And then like it was cool because I got to put a picture of like my LSVT Big certification. So I just downloaded a PDF of that and screenshotted it on my computer, and again, just like uploaded it. Some other artifacts that I added to were like pictures. I'm an ordained minister, so I added my PDF of that to show my license. So it's really easy to showcase who I am and what I do as a person, and like actual proof, not just like, oh, hey, here's my license number. Like, no, you can actually show the license and that it is legitimate. So
that's going to be video number 4. We will get there. So let's hold that thought. Quickly, that's okay. Quickly moving through for course structure. I had mentioned before that this was a pivoted course from a in-person discussion based pre-COVID to a Zoom-based synchronous course that met twice a week for 5 weeks. So it was an intensive course. And I mentioned before the priority in the affective domain. Given that this was the last didactic course prior to a final internship in a 3-year intensive clinical doctoral program. The resume and Portfolium project were just half of the final assignments due in that 5-week course, as you can see on the slide. So this was an intense process. So just to give you some context in terms of the student investment and positive feedback that we're receiving, this was in addition to a case-based ethical project that was worth quite a bit of points for the course. Lastly, and then I'm going to kick it over to Felice. Our program level goals are on the screen. You can see the highlight for professional development and awareness about practicing ethically and embodying the core values and codes of ethics of our profession. And then lastly, really just highlighting that the ePortfolio was the perfect vehicle to showcase not just the professional development plan and serve as a repository for their important documents and artifacts, but also to be able to speak to those soft skills of entry-level healthcare providers, to be able to demonstrate those reflective skills in an online capacity. So I'm going to hand this over to Felice. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Adrian. Now I will talk about how we designed this course, and I will only focus on the ePortfolio integration. So we use the backward design process to design the integration of ePortfolios to this course. So we started with identifying the desired results and ask ourselves, what do we want students to accomplish at the end of this course? We wanted students to develop a professional portfolio which demonstrates their development and accomplishments before they enter the workforce. So we also wanted students to gain self-awareness and reflection skills. So the next step was determining the acceptable evidence. So we focused on the question how we will know if students have achieved the desired goals. Students will develop an e-portfolio and then create a resume that will be a part of their e-portfolios. So we created rubrics to evaluate these assignments, and these rubrics also guide students in self-assessment of their performance. So the last and important step was planning learning experiences and interaction. And we started thinking about which activities would help students to accomplish the desired goals. So Adrian didn't want to just introduce the Portfolium platform at the beginning of the course and then leave students alone while they are building their e-portfolios and evaluate them at the end of the course. Instead, she wanted to make this course a personal journey for each student, where they can reflect upon their professional identity and development throughout the program. So she also wanted students to witness each other's journey and contribute to each other's journey by providing constructive feedback. So clearly, this told us that we need something different than the traditional instruction. We were thinking about different teaching strategies, and we decided to use flipped classroom model, and that allowed, we had a lot of breakout rooms, and this allowed peer-to-peer interaction and feedback, and we also used assignment scaffolding method. So we will now talk about how the chosen teaching strategies helped us to support students. And on this slide, you see the assignments. So students had two main deliverables, resume and e-portfolio. And we broke down these two big projects into smaller parts. And they become more manageable for these students. And we talk about how intense this course was. So we needed to do this. And this allowed students to receive formative feedback at different times of the process. So you see the parts of the resume project in orange and parts of the portfolio project in green color. And the lines represent on this diagram how students use the feedback that they get from one part of the project for creating another part of the project, and how each part of the project built upon each other. So for instance, students complete first part of the resume and receive feedback in week 1, and they use this feedback while they are creating their portfolio profile in week 2. And they also use this feedback for revising their resume and submitting their final resume. So now let's hear Michelle's experience with the assignments.
Like all together doing the resume and the portfolio simultaneously was really nice by week, not just doing, okay, do your whole resume, do the whole portfolio, because it was week, okay, this is what I had trouble with here during this, like, I think the first part was like your work experience, your clinical experience, and then putting that onto Portfolium, your work experience and your clinical experience. Okay, like how does that differ from your resume to your Portfolium, logistically wise, but then also helps you clean it up. But it also, when you get to the next part, it's not going to be as choppy because you went through those road bumps when you did the breakout rooms and we did the peer-to-peer review. It's like, okay, this is what I'm going to do next time. It wasn't as choppy. So it wasn't like you're doing this whole resume and this whole new Portfolium in one shot, and then it could be all be a mess and just be frustrated. So it was really nice how it was broken up like each week. I think it was each week, just a little section. And I think overall, I think all of our products came out really nice. So that's just like, I think a big highlight between the resume and the Portfolium, and just the way the course was structured. So it was nice.
Okay, so we have talked about the assignments a lot, so you might want to know about the technical aspects of the assignments. So how we create them using our learning management system. So again, as Karen said, like it is kind of integrated, but it is not also. So we use the free version of Portfolium, and then there's a button in Canvas to access the Portfolium account, but it's not integrated into the assignments and courses. So we had to find a way to access students' Portfolium accounts. So what we did, we used the assignment tool, and we shared the detailed instructions and our rubrics in the Canvas assignments. And students share their Portfolium URL as a submission, and Adrian would be able to see their Portfolium account. And if you don't use Canvas, you can still use Portfolium. You can still integrate Portfolium into your courses, because again, it's not integrated into Canvas only. So you can access Portfolium outside of the Canvas. So here you see an example of the assignment instructions and rubric. We provided very detailed instructions for each part of the projects, and created rubrics which are aligned with our desired goals. By this way, students knew what is expected from them clearly at the beginning of the course. And they also have the rubrics guide them to check the quality of their work and completeness. So it helped them to reflect on their work. So now Adrian will give you more details about the breakout room activities and feedback mechanisms.
Sure thing. Thanks, Felice. All right, so our instructions, you can see both on the rubric and the detailed instructions on the left that we broke the Portfolium down into two components, identity and professional direction. So as we move through that, how do you really speak to personal and professional identity and professional direction in breakouts? And how do we really set this up for students to be successful? So the design really was a big class briefing, and then breaking out into rooms of 4 students, and then coming back for a wrap up. And within each of those breakouts, within Canvas, there's a page specifically for the students' break activities with the step-by-step directions with time limits. So to keep things very task-oriented, it gave students a sense of pride and accomplishment, especially doing so many things remotely. I think it was helpful for students to feel like they had control over their time, and they knew what was coming, and they were able to finish their work in session for the most part. So being able to set things up for them to be successful and effective, I think went a long way into their buy-in. Designed within those activities, there were guiding questions for that effective domain, specific to growth and development, specific to honing in on their strengths and getting feedback from their peers in that breakout on their strengths or how they're handling those effective domains. And both Felice and I have talked about those various feedback mechanisms, both summative and formative, as well as peer-to-peer feedback. And in those breakouts, I often felt like a bartender moving between 8 breakout rooms, checking in on the students, see how they were doing with the process, and answering questions on the fly. So it was a really helpful format. I wanted to give you kind of a snippet of what those breakout activities looked like. This was right out the gate, part 1 of the resume. And I gave students access to be able to edit this page. And it was interesting to see the types of questions that they were adding in about where they were unsure. So I thought it was a resource that was really helpful to get immediate feedback that wasn't just a drop into a breakout room, either listening or asking questions, but to be able to see them in live time. And it really did help with the wrap up to be able to address those questions as a whole, and took some of the pressure off of me to be able to, catalog every question from every breakout room. So this was a sample of students of one breakout just entering their information onto the template that I had provided them. So let's hear from Michelle about her experience with the breakouts.
And then, so at first I actually did it different than all my classmates, and I had all of my artifacts listed just under the portfolio and not under the separate. So being in that breakout room, they actually taught me how to pull all my artifacts into the separate projects, which was super helpful, because if I didn't do that, then I wouldn't know. So it's good because it's actually like a life skill that you need is collaborate with others to figure out problems, and not just, I don't know how to do it and give up. But it's like, no, your classmates are there, use them. So that was super helpful for me. And then as we progressed, like the portfolio each week, building and building, and we viewed each other's, it was like, oh, I really like what that person did. Maybe I should add that as well. Or, oh, I really like how they wrote that about themselves. Or just little things like that to take and give from other people's portfolios. So I think that it was just helpful overall just to design it with just the little glitches that like maybe I wasn't sure. And then it was cool because like them in the last breakout group, I think, like I was like, oh, I could help you with this part because I finished that. So just a good collaboration piece together, and it was actually worked really well virtually. So
great. This slide really just talks from a graphic standpoint about the feedback mechanisms that we've discussed. And then some of the peer-to-peer feedback was really surprising. We wanted to give you just a screenshot of some of the feedback that students provided to each other in writing. So to really both call each other out when they didn't fulfill the criteria, but also to make suggestions and to give praise. I thought it was such a heartwarming thing to see, especially teaching virtually, to see the support and also the constructive feedback that students were providing each other. One of the unique things about the students knowing each other for 2.5 years is they've been on teams together and known each other pre-pandemic. So I think that was an advantage. So let's pause for questions for part 2, and then we'll wrap up with lessons learned and next steps.
And I'm not, yeah, I'm on, sorry about that. I'm looking at the Q&A and I'm not seeing any questions. So this is your chance, everyone, for part 2.
Please wait.
Yes, and I get it. We're already running a little bit out of time. Part 3 is pretty quick. So now that you've seen so much of, how Adrian and Felice, put all this effort into the build and the design, and basically making up for the lack of integration functionality. If you have any questions about that, or if you have any questions about how they managed to get all of that within that 5 weeks, that the student adoption and that active participation and peer-to-peer feedback.
We'll let your words ruminate for a while. Let's finish our last 2 slides here, and then we'll open all the doors. Maybe they're just waiting patiently. So lessons learned. On a personal level, I was all on board for a flipped classroom, but it was really surprising from a reflective component. I would be remiss if I didn't address this. But I did feel some resistance to really giving up the really quality course I had built and taught for many years, to be able to flip to this very different layout. But it is an active learning prioritization that your role as faculty changes from I have to deliver all this content and help you along to I'm facilitating an atmosphere where you can now learn and complete the tasks that you need to complete in order to get this learning done. So the mindset of having to cover everything or teach this didactically and in person and discussion based was really counterintuitive to really optimizing student performance in a remote delivery. So I think that's helpful to share, because this was not easy, not logistically easy, and not easy on a personal level. It really challenged me with my teaching strategies and my ability to demonstrate flexible thinking. It required a lot more planning time. and Felice can attest to those detailed instructions and rubrics. She was a taskmaster to really make sure that those were more clear. So I cannot emphasize that enough. Your instructions need to be absolutely so clear and explicit every step of the way for this to actually work. The value of peer review, I cannot overstate. If you do nothing else with your flipped classroom, make sure to have some component of peer review, and to make sure that your break activities are structured and interactive. I am a changed faculty member, and a proponent of interactive activities and peer feedback. And just on a logistical note, the time investment to review 30 plus students' portfolios was much, much less, probably a third less than paper portfolios. So definitely, if you're looking to make that transition, that is a silver lining there. Where are we going next? Well, we're going to take a really deep dive into the landscape of literature on e-portfolios to both look at how to roll this out more systematically for our program, and also to be able to backfill it into some of the earlier courses in the program where students haven't yet been to the clinical environment or don't have the same sense of reflective capability as our final year pre-graduates do. And then just exploring in terms of how do we look at assessment, how do we find some institutions that are best practice models for e-portfolios, and then looking at training and more detail for instructions for both students and instructors.
It worked out well, and I can honestly say going and applying for jobs starting in May is I have a Portfolium that's all together, and I have a resume that's very well structured, so it was well worth the time.
Great, here's some references, and now we'll pause for questions and wrap up.
Okay, I do want to mention that we have a request to play video 2 again because we had problems with that video.
Let's honor that request.
First, since Google is integrated into Canvas, was Google Sites a consideration for the ePortfolio assignment? Why Portfolium compared to other platforms?
Great question. Do you want to sequence? Will we play the video first, or should we address the questions?
I think we should probably, finish up and answer any questions first.
Okay, fair enough. So yes, we did look at Google Sites. That was actually my front runner before speaking to Felice and Karen. My issue with Google Sites and my reservation for it after seeing Portfolium was my own judgment call that with how intense the semester is for our students in 5 weeks, they're also studying for a comprehensive exam and taking another time-intensive course at the same time. I wasn't quite confident that for them to build the Google Sites, that would be a reasonable expectation for all students. So I was trying to stack the deck purposefully to find a platform that was as intuitive as possible. And that's really what pushed me to Portfolium. I think when we talk about faculty e-portfolios, I'm not really sure that Portfolium would necessarily capture everything that needs to be captured in the best way. But for a work readiness standpoint and for a student ease of access and usability, Portfolium was the way to go for these students in this semester for sure.
I did want to add in that I think the students would probably attest to the ease of grabbing artifacts and just putting them in. As Adrian had mentioned, building a Google site takes a certain skill set that maybe not everybody has. So we don't want to spend time and energy trying to develop that. Instead, we really want to focus on that, learning and reflection and development piece. So I think Portfolium really takes away all of that learning curve practically. And as one of the student videos said, that it was very easy, I think, for everyone to, even if someone was having a little bit of a stumble, it was easy for others to explain it, rather than it being, a drawn out step-by-step process. Okay, I'm wondering if we can do the video, if we can try to fit that in.
So
it's a 3-minute video, so we can make it.
It's kind of like Facebook, your profile picture and your background. So if someone were to see my portfolio and be like, oh, I really like your background, I think that's one of the coolest parts. So they ask me oh, where was that taken? And I would literally say, oh, that's at the Cooper River. That's where I run every single day, and I love to watch the sunrise. So that I think is really cool, because that's a conversation piece in yourself. What you put in your background could literally just start a conversation and then you're like, oh, these are the artifacts that I was just talking about. So I'll just start with my first one, just talking about running. So here I was able to like show, this is a picture of me on Broad Street in Philadelphia after like the Broad Street run. And then I was able to add in a good detailed section of how running relates to my professional goals and my desires, whereas I wouldn't be able to do this on my resume. You couldn't pick up my resume and know that how am I going to use my running as a way to professionally grow myself. But I can say that like I'm looking forward to sharing my experiences as a future PT with patients who are interested in long distance running. And it's also one of my coping strategies, which is a really great asset to me because it shows that I know I can get stressed, but I do have an outlet that I can go to, and that's running. And that's super healthy outlet. So as an employer, from an employer standpoint, looking at this, they would say, okay, like they didn't just do everything in school and okay, well, are they burnt out now? Like, no, it's okay because like she has something that she can go to cope to. And I think also like another cool little thing about Portfolium is like the tags. So I can put like hashtag running biomechanics, and then maybe those viewers can see it. And then also pretty cool, one of my classmates liked it. So that's like a fun part. And then just talking about my LSVT Big certification, which is a certification that I got this past summer, which I was really excited about. Kind of sets me apart from like other candidates that are applying for jobs, but something I'm also really passionate about. So I could show that, yes, I got my LSVT Big certification, which you would see on my resume, but I couldn't give that detail on my resume because it'd be too wordy, but I can talk about here about how I used this at my last affiliation because I was on a acute rehab neurological floor, and I actually used it with my patients and I saw the benefits of it. So that's something that I could write here that I couldn't do on my resume. So I thought that was really nice. And it's also nice and it's in color because it's on the computer. Yeah. So that's that part. And then other pretty cool things. So this is awesome. So I put my applied research poster from one of the conferences that our group went to, but one of the cool features is that I was able to tag my the members that we worked with. And so that also gives them credit. And then I think this one has like the most views, probably because it was linked to other teammates. And that's a good thing because you want to show who you collaborated with. And oh, well, maybe somebody knows my classmate, Anna Johnson. And then let me go to Michelle's page because she knows her. So she's probably, you know, a good person I could talk to. So it's just a great way to make connections about your projects that you made.
Great. So before we get timed out, I want to thank my co-presenters. I would like to thank Ariel, who's behind the scenes here, and our graduating student from the class of 2021, Michelle Palmer, for donating her time and feedback for this presentation. Thanks so much for attending.